Goosebumps Horrorland The Scream of the Haunted Mask by Oral Stein. Read by Little Book Owl. Chapter 6. I spun around. Laura stood behind us at the edge of the apple orchard. Her blonde hair blew wildly around her face. She waved frantically, shouting for us to come back. So Sabrina and I rounded up the kids. They were pretty easy to herd back. The long walk and all the running and screaming had them tired out. The parents and babysitters were waiting in the front room to take them home. Sabrina, Laura, and I stuffed them into their coats and hats, and they were gone. Silence. Only sound now were the rattle of the old windows against the wind, and the steady tickling of the grandfather clock in the front hallway. Three of us cleaned up the room. Then we headed to the kitchen. It was an enormous old farmhouse kitchen with a wide window along the back of the house, looking out on the pasture. Laura had a pot of hot chocolate on the stove. She poured it into tall white mugs. We sat down to sip it and relax at the kitchen table with its red and white checked tablecloth. "So, what's the deal with the abandoned stable?" I asked. "Why did you yell like that?" Laura slowly twirled her mug between her pale hands. "Don't you know about this old stable?" she asked us in a hushed voice. A hard gust of wind rattled the kitchen window. Sabrina and I shook our heads. "We never walked there before," I said. Laura nodded. She took a sip of hot chocolate. "It's a scary story," she said. "Mrs. Lynch told me the whole thing. It's actually very sad." I leaned forward. "A scary story? What do you mean?" Laura curled the strand of her hair between her fingers. She kept her eyes on the window. "It was a riding stable many years ago," she started. "Very popular, with beautiful horses, well cared for and well groomed." She took another sip from her mug and held it between her hands. "One night, people in the farmhouse heard screams, high-pitched shrieks and screams, not human screams. They were, they knew they couldn't be human screams." I suddenly had a cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. "What do you mean? Who was screaming?" I asked. "The screams were shrill and frightened," Laura continued. "They came from the stable. The horses were screaming." She twisted and untwisted her hair. "I've never heard a horse scream." "Have you?" I swallowed. It it must have been terrifying, but everyone went running to the stable. They pulled open the doors and found the horses dead, Laura said. "All of them, lying against the wall in a heap. All dead." "Huh?" I gasped. "Why? What killed them?" "Panic," Laura replied. "They all died from fear." Sabrina had her hands up to her cheeks. Her dark eyes were wide with horror. "But why?" she asked. Wind rattled the window. I shivered. "I love horses. I want to work after school in the stable near my house. But they didn't have a job for me, so I ended up at Tumbledown Farms." "The stable boy was blamed," Laura said. "He sneaked into the stable one night. They think he wanted to scare the horse groomer, or maybe someone else in the stable." "But he scared the horses instead?" I asked. Laura nodded. "You could hear them screeching and wailing from miles. They went insane. They were locked inside the stable, but they stepped it. They crunched each other against the door, against the stable wall. The stable boy fell under their hooves and was kicked to death." "Oh, wow!" I muttered. I glanced across the table at Sabrina. She hadn't taken a sip of her hot chocolate. She had her eyes down. "That's the story, according to Miss Lunch," Laura said. "I warned you it was sad. Can you imagine opening the stable door and finding the horse in a heap dead?" I swallowed hard. "But how exactly did he scare the horses?" I asked. Laura let out a long breath. Her face was even paler than usual. "You will never believe it," she said. "The farmers claimed it was all caused by a mask. A hideous Halloween mask." Laura shook her head. "But when they cleaned up the stable, the ugly mask was nowhere to be found. It totally disappeared." I heard a thud. I was so upset by Laura's story, I didn't even realize I had knocked over my cocoa mug. The hot liquid ran down my jeans. "Carlbeth, are you okay?" I heard Sabrina, but I was too deep in thought to answer. "Carlbeth, are you okay? Carlbeth?" Chapter 7. Could she be talking about the same mask? My heart pounded in my chest. I pictured the mask, so hideous with its wrinkled, ratty green flesh. It crooked the row of jagged fangs. I glanced up. Sabrina was mopping up the spilled hot chocolate. She put her hand on my shoulder. "Earth calling, Carlbeth," she whispered. I blinked and focused on Laura. "Did Miss Lauren tell you anything else about the stable boy's mask?" I asked her. She shook her head. "No, just that there's a legend about it. About how it always appears at Halloween time. That sent a chill down the back of my spine." Laura narrowed her silver gray eyes at me. "Why are you so interested, Carlbeth?" It's just so sad," I stammered. "Know what's weird?" Sabrina said. "Carlbeth said she heard a horse whinny in that old stable." Laura squinted at me. "No way. That's part of the story, that the ghost of the horse remained in the stable." "She heard a horse," Sabrina insisted. "Definitely. a horse whinnying. Right, Calibet? Before I could answer, Mrs. Lynch came bursting in. Her arms were loaded down with firewood logs. She dumped them in front of the old pot-bellied stove at the back of the kitchen. "Are you all talking about a famous haunted stable?" she asked. She wiped her hands off on her long skirt. Then she grabbed a mug and emptied the hot chocolate pot into it. "It's funny to tell ghost stories at Halloween," she said. "I don't believe in ghosts, but you know what everyone says, don't you? That the old stable is haunted by those poor horses and by the stable boy." We stared at her. "You mean the stable boy's ghost is still there?" I asked. Mrs. Lodge nodded. "They say he won't leave until he gets his haunted Halloween mask back." I couldn't help myself. I let out a sharp cry. Across the table, Laura stared at me. "What's wrong, Colibet?" she asked. Mrs. Lynch laughed. "Maybe Colibet just doesn't like ghosts," she said. "Right," I said. My face felt hot. "Scary stories always give me nightmares." I jumped up. "Come on, Sabrina. The bus will be here any minute." Sabrina and I put on our coats. As we walked down the gravel path to the road, I knew we were both asking ourselves the same questions. Did the stable boy have the same mask all those years ago? The mask that's in my basement? And was a boy's ghost in the abandoned stable waiting to get it back? At dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about Laura's story about the poor horses screaming their heads off, stamping into the walls and dying in horrible panic. About the mask, the ugly, terrifying mask. "Colibet, are you awake?" Dad asked. "Didn't you hear me asking about your job?" No, sorry," I muttered. Maybe she's a zombie." "My little brother." "No," I said. "Let's see." He pinched my arm really hard. "Hey!" I jerked my arms away. "Give me a break, Noah." Noah giggled and tried to pinch me again. "Brat, you're worse than a 5-year-old kid," I said. "You are worse than the 4-year-olds," he said. "Oh, clever. Those kids must run your rage down today," Mom said. She reached over and smoothed the back of my hair. "Yeah, they were pretty wild," I muttered. "You're worse than 2-year-olds," Noah said and giggled. "Some more? Can I be excused?" I asked. I hurried up to my room. I had a lot of homework, but I couldn't concentrate on it. I kept worrying about the haunted mask. I thought about the last night, how it pulled me down to the basement against my will, how it forced me to take it out of its hidden place, how it almost made me pull it down over my head, how it screamed, screamed. I was totally freaking last night. Such a close call. Did I leave the metal box open? Did I lock it away? I couldn't remember. I paced back and forth in my room, thinking. I paced back and forth in my room, thinking hard, thinking about the boy in the stable, the horses, the boy in the basement. I realized I had no choice. I had to make sure the mask was safely tucked inside the hiding place. I had to be sure the box was locked tight. I crept out of my room and made my way down to the basement stairs. I couldn't hear Mom and Dad in the den. They were shouting and cheering as guns fired and bombs exploded. My parents recently discovered video games. Almost every night after dinner, they were in the front of the widescreen TV playing Mar Master 2 in a high def. Totally weird. I gripped the handle to the basement door and took a deep breath. I didn't want to go down there. The scream of the mouse still echoed in my ears. But I had to make sure I had locked it away. I pulled open the door, clicked on the basement light, and started down the steep wooden stairs. Again, they creaked under my feet. I made it halfway down. I couldn't hear the loud hum of the
You know just what you do to me. Play my emotions like a pair of puppet strings.